The lakeside restaurant was all polished cherry wood and fake wealth, the perfect setting for my family's annual performance. I finally gathered the courage, pushing the exciting, terrifying news across the table. I was resigning, launching my own digital strategy consultancy after 5 years of intense, secretive planning. I watched my parents for a sign of pride. What I received was a cold, surgical strike from across the table. My brother Kevin didn't even bother to hide his contempt. He was ostensibly checking the stock market on his phone, but I knew he was listening. He muttered a dismissive sound, then put his phone down deliberately, the screen flashing off. His smile was thin, pitying, and designed for maximum destruction. He leaned in, his voice carrying clearly over the gentle clinking of silverware. "You'll never be anything more than a glorified freelancer, Aubrey. You'll never be anything." The silence was the worst. It wasn't the sound of shock, it was the sound of agreement. My father let out a short, dismissive chuckle, confirming Kevin's verdict. I felt a tidal wave of blood rush up to my temples, but years of suppressing my anger around them kicked in. My gaze locked onto Kevin's smug face, and the burning shame solidified into a terrifying, cold certainty. I reached for my half-full wine glass, but my hand stopped, hovering an inch above the cool crystal. I placed it back down, slowly, making a quiet, decisive thud. My jaw clenched so hard a sharp pain radiated to my ear. They just burned the last bridge. I heard the clock start ticking on my revenge. And my name is Aubrey Shaw. I'm 29. For the past decade, I didn't just work in digital strategy, I breathed it. I was the architect who designed the sprawling campaigns, the one who built the systems that brought in the real money. Kevin, 2 years older, was the golden child, the safe investment banker who only understood the surface-level reports. His world was inherited confidence, mine was earned expertise. In that moment, I realized my success couldn't be quiet anymore. It had to be inescapable. I was the eldest, but always treated like the younger, riskier sibling. Kevin, with his tailored suits and predictable finance job, was their investment. I was their liability. That cold realization, delivered over expensive food, shifted my focus entirely. My consultancy, Stratus Digital, was no longer about professional ambition alone. It was about correcting the family's balance sheet of worth. The months leading up to that night had been a blur of sustained exhaustion. I had been working 2 full-time schedules, my demanding corporate job, and secretly building the foundational infrastructure for Stratus Digital. I existed on 6 hours of sleep and cheap coffee. My small, windowless apartment was my fortress. I had meticulously saved every penny, sacrificing vacations, new clothes, and even my social life, all to ensure my company's financial runway was long enough to survive Kevin's inevitable dismissal. The undercurrent of disrespect wasn't subtle, it was systemic. Kevin constantly called my specialization in server optimization glorified computer repair, demanding I justify my passion with simple, massive ROI numbers he could understand. When I needed a small seed loan 6 months prior, he had deliberately told my father, "She doesn't need our money, Dad. She needs discipline. She'll just waste it on a fancy MacBook and artisanal coffee shops." That phrase, artisanal coffee, had become the family shorthand for my foolish ambition. The dinner drew to an agonizing close. I pulled out my modest wallet, determined to pay my share and remain financially autonomous. Kevin intercepted the waitress with a grand gesture. He pulled out a thick, clean stack of $100 bills, his quarterly bonus, and ostentatiously paid the entire check, sighing dramatically about the cost of feeding dreamers. Then, for maximum effect, he tossed a couple of crumpled 20s toward the tip jar without meeting the waitress's eye. He didn't just pay, he performed, confirming his superior financial standing and cementing my status as the dependent failure. Driving back, the humiliation was a knot of nausea in my stomach. I pulled into an empty parking lot, unable to see through the burning in my eyes. The self-doubt was a venom, hot and swift. What if they were right? What if I was built for stability, not the risk I was undertaking? The fear of my savings running out was a cold, rational dread, but Kevin's predicted failure was a far deeper emotional terror. The next morning, I was barely functioning. My phone chimed. It was Vivian, my brilliant former CTO and mentor. "I heard you took the plunge," her text read. "Forget the static noise, Aubrey. Your work speaks for itself. They see a risk, I see the market gap." 2 hours later, she called, not to offer pity, but to quietly contract me for a small, complex digital overhaul for her own new venture. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was the professional validation I desperately needed. 2 days later, the final malicious piece fell into place. I saw a job posting from my old firm. the senior strategy position I was slated for before I resigned. I learned through an old colleague that my brother's firm, Ascent Capital, was now a major new client, and Kevin had actively lobbied the old CEO against bringing me on for even contract work. He hadn't just predicted my failure, he was actively guaranteeing it by cutting off my retreat. I walked into my small office, the cheap fluorescent lights buzzing mockingly overhead. I sat down and opened my business plan. I didn't cry, I didn't lash out. I opened a fresh spreadsheet entitled The Columns, Asset Acquisition and Inescapable Visibility. The revenge wouldn't be dramatic or emotional, it would be a perfect business transaction. I knew Ascent Capital was a fortress built on sand. They were old money, terrified of modern digital infrastructure. Their search engine optimization was archaic, and their security was a joke. I realized that my skills, the very technological expertise he sneered at, were their precise, critical vulnerability. I pivoted Stratus Digital's business model to specialize exclusively in high-stakes digital infrastructure for outdated capital firms. For the next 18 months, I lived and breathed my firm. I didn't see my family. I didn't go out. I became a machine. Stratus Digital grew through intense, focused performance. I hired my first junior strategists, demanding the same relentless focus.
Then, the pivotal hire, Maria. Maria was sharp, flawlessly organized, and immediately understood that Stratus Digital was not just a company, but a mission. 2 years later, the hard work paid off. Stratus Digital secured its largest contract, restructuring the entire digital network for a colossal, international venture capital conglomerate. I was reviewing the organizational chart of their sprawling investments, confirming the scope of my work. Buried 3 levels down, among the subsidiary firms I was now responsible for auditing and fixing, was a familiar, rapidly failing name that made the paper tremble slightly in my hand: Ascent Capital. Kevin's firm. I had just been hired to dissect the very company that employed my brother. I signed the lease for my new headquarters, a high-rise space downtown with panoramic glass walls overlooking the city my brother thought he owned. Vivian sent a single text: "The view is better from the top, Alb." Stratus Digital was no longer a startup, it was an industry force. I finally had the title, the resources, and the unassailable position I had earned. My new VC client needed a comprehensive digital risk assessment of their portfolio. I called Maria into my new office. "Maria," I said, my voice entirely professional, "Ascent Capital requires a full, deep dive audit. I want that report on my desk first. Run it strictly by the book." I handed her the engagement letter. It felt clean, controlled, and intensely satisfying. The audit report Maria delivered was damning. Ascent Capital's digital performance was catastrophic. Their archaic systems had been breached, their client data was exposed, and the digital lead generation was non-existent. The report confirmed they were hemorrhaging client capital directly due to the security and technological failures Kevin had always ignored and mocked. The VC client was furious, placing Ascent Capital on a 90-day, non-negotiable remediation plan. The cornerstone of the plan, as meticulously designed by my team at Stratus Digital, was the immediate hiring of an external, highly technical digital operations manager, someone with the exact specialization Kevin had always dismissed. The news was swift and quiet. I learned through my industry contacts that Kevin had been unceremoniously pushed out of his VP role at Ascent Capital weeks prior. His failure to adapt to new digital compliance standards was the final straw. He was unemployed, over-leveraged, and desperate for any high-level placement to save his reputation. The VC client, having zero faith left in Ascent Capital's management, outsourced the critical hiring process for the new digital operations manager entirely to Stratus Digital. I had total control over who would be hired to fix the mess. I called Maria into my office again. "We are running this search, Maria. Your authority is absolute. I want the most qualified candidate who meets every technical requirement." The applications flooded in a few days later. Maria sent me the top 5 CVs for final review. I scrolled through them clinically until I saw the 5th candidate's picture and name. The resume was padded, boasting inflated titles from his golden years, but the name was unmistakable: Kevin Shaw. He was desperate enough to apply for the very mid-level operational role required to fix the collapse his arrogance had caused. He had no idea who held the keys to his future. I completely removed myself from the final selection. I instructed Maria, you make the final decision. Run him through the ringer. Treat him exactly as you would any other mid-level, technically proficient applicant. His personal history is irrelevant to the job. I ensured the power remained with my representative, maintaining my strategic distance. Maria, efficient and formidable, handled the final interviews. She was professional, clinical, and completely unmoved by Kevin's attempts to substitute bravado for technical knowledge. She sent him the offer, a highly specific, demanding job description with a salary that was significantly less than his previous one. He was humiliated, but cornered. He had to take it. Kevin accepted the job offer without negotiation. His welcome packet was issued. His final HR agreement listed his immediate supervisor for the implementation team, the person who held the power to schedule, approve, and fire him. The signature at the bottom of the contract was not mine, but my delegated authority, Maria, Executive Operations Lead, Stratus Digital. He was reporting directly to my executive assistant. The fall was complete. Maria brought the final signed contract to me. I took the document and looked at Kevin's shaky, familiar script on the signature line. There was no joy, only a profound sense of equilibrium. I handed the document back to Maria, giving her a substantial, unannounced bonus. I realized my revenge was not about anger, it was about the cold, mathematical certainty of professional justice. I never sent Kevin an email. I never contacted him again. I just continued to expand Stratus Digital, signing new deals and acquiring larger clients. My parents, subdued and quiet, sometimes called Maria, trying to get updates on the important new digital work Kevin was doing. Maria, of course, was always strictly professional and never revealed the full truth. My final triumph was in my absolute silence. My internal monologue, he once said I'd never be anything. He was wrong. And now, the only way he could save his career was by taking orders from the assistant of the sister whose worth he had so arrogantly dismissed.